Thank you. So of course, I prepared a very long speech, but I've prepared a speech that summarizes some things that some of you may not know have happened over this time that I was here. And when we first came out here, there was no 91 freeway, no I-15. There were no post office boxes available, so we got our mail general delivery at the post office. There was no garbage collection, so we had to haul it out to the dump. And we had to drill a well, because there's no water in our area, and put a septic system in. So it was looking a little rural when we moved out here. And I was good with that. And I'm still good with it being a little rural. So I hope people keep that in mind as we go forward. So my whole story started in 1978. I was about to move out here, and I said, I better find out something about Wildomar. So I looked in a paper. There was a little notice that said, hey, the Board of Supervisors in Riverside was going to be considering the Windsong Tract and some things about it. And I said, well, I had passed that, so I knew where the Windsong Tract was, but I had no idea what it was about. So I appeared down there, and what do you think? How many people do you think were at the Board of Supervisors meeting? There was myself and Marna O'Brien. We were the two. Marna spoke on a flooding issue in Windsong, and I said, you know, I don't like all this development that you're putting in here, to the then supervisor, Abraham. And I think we should not put as many houses as we're putting. And he motions to me to come forward to right near where he was. And he said to me, why do you think we're building a freeway? And at that point I realized that the affairs of Wildomar were going to be partially dictated by the county and the plans that they had for our area. Because I could have answered that. Yeah, they're building the freeway for one purpose, to put all these houses in. So, and of course, they went ahead on that path. So that was my first introduction to politics. That was in 1978. I didn't know what to do with this, because I'd just been told that I was not going to have complete control over my destiny, having moved into a place where it looked like I was going to have complete control of my destiny, a rural place that had little connection to the big cities. At that point, I found the Wildomar Interest League. Some of you may have never heard of it, but it was a volunteer organization in Wildomar that was doing all sorts of things that cities normally do, looking at different things that were going on in the community, fire problems, flood problems, traffic problems, and then they were reporting these to whoever they decided it would make a difference to. So I said, okay, I've got a volunteer group. This is a community I want to preserve, because communities don't always do this. In fact, it's pretty rare that they step outside of their bounds and just take care of their own business without having any authority or power, other than the power of persuasion. So I went to a number of those meetings at the hospital, and then later fire station. And I did not join the Wildomar Interest League. I just knew that this was the right thing to have in an area. Later, that Wildomar Interest League became the Wildomar Municipal Advisory Council and reported to the supervisor. So it was not quite as free, but it was the same concept. If they were interested in something, they could bring it up, and they did. You look at those agendas from that time, and you say, how can a committee that doesn't have any power or authority do so much for a community? I did become part of the MAC for a few years, and I was still impressed with that thought. This community is good, and it's transitioned to another level with the Wildomar MAC, but it's still good. So at that time, we were just beginning to raise our family, and I have 5 children. So I decided to build my own house. So I designed my own house, and then we moved out here and started construction. So it's a raised foundation house, a ranch house. So picture over there on the side. That has 2,300 square feet in it and a detached garage. And Diane and I built it. So we didn't hire contractors. We were just the original type of let's go do it builder people. I got a loan from the bank as an owner builder. So I don't even know if they give those anymore, but at the time I did. And so what we did is we put the foundation in, the raised foundation. Then I had $18,000 worth of lumber dumped in the front yard, put a tarp over it, and we started building. So, yeah, sort of like a pioneer. I picture myself as sort of a pioneer, and maybe one of the last pioneers of this type. So I'm not telling you how it was that nobody's noticing this. But they are noticing it, but I'm politically astute already. So the first school we attended was Wildomar Elementary School, and that's what started my thought that maybe I could improve education. So one of the first things I did at that school that made an impression on me was the school district didn't have money for a library. So the parent-teacher organization just got together one weekend, bought plywood, and built a library in one of the mobiles. So I said, okay, this is Wildomar, this is good. So, but I ended up running for school board in 1989. And at that time I was worried about the gifted program in the district. But of course, I still worried about it, but as soon as I was on the school board, I saw there was a heck of a lot of other stuff going on that we needed to take care of, including the double sessions, the education in reading, which was having the whole language problem, and so forth. So I was on the school board for 5 years. And during that time, this is what I am. I said, okay, I worked and I took care of the stuff and I promoted my gifted program, which got started and ultimately died. But anyway, it got started, so people started thinking about it. And then I was off the school board, so what do? So I did not go back into some political thing. I decided I would improve the schools from without. So you'll see on the board there something called Parents for Safe Schools. That shows a child trying to go to school. I met with the Riverside County Gang Task Force on my own, but of course, since I'd been on the school board, they were going to meet me. And I said, hey, what's the truth here in this valley? And I heard the truth. And then I said, I wonder if any parents are worried about this. And I found out that there were plenty of parents worried about it. So I held a parent meeting and had about 14 parents come out whose children had had trouble with gangs in the Lake Elsinore schools. At that time, the school district was denying they had any problems. So here's a subtle way to do politics. I knew the people in the district, so I said, hey, I've got some parents that want to meet you. So all the principals were invited to a meeting where what I did is I had the parents stand up and talk. I didn't have to do any more. Things started happening because parents are very passionate about what happens to their children that's wrong. So that was a kind of thing that I tended to do. Another thing along the same line that I did was I said, where's our library in this town? And I went and into the housing tracts and I knocked on doors and I asked people, hey, are you interested in being in a library group? So, yeah, I was pretty bold. And I found enough people so that ultimately I had a library group at Wildomar Elementary School. Now, the county, because of that, the county noticed that there was now a library group. And anyway, my wife and I were involved in Friends of the Library in Lake Elsinore for 11 years. So we were sort of known around anyway. And they said, well, maybe you should be on a task group in 1993. They made a task group to look at libraries. And in 1998, I was on a task group to pick the location of libraries and the structure. So there was a big controversy at the time whether all libraries should be in the cities, whether they should expand the Lake Elsinore Library, or for example, or whether, hey, it's okay to put a library in the unincorporated areas. Well, my views prevailed, and that's why the Mission Trail Library is where it is. So it's there because I convinced them that some libraries did go in unincorporated areas, and anyway, it was too difficult to get to the Lake Elsinore Library from Wildomar. So you have to tell them something, and it was difficult. So we didn't normally go in that area or that way. So another thing that I did for education was, for 11 years I ran an independent science fair. And this science fair was called Private Schools Unified Science District. Nothing to do with the Lake Elsinore School District, but I don't care. Because it's education, I don't care if it's some other group of students. They needed it, and I did something for them. And then I judged at Science Fair and History Day, which I also had done at the county level. So I kept in this education thing, and for a while. So what happened? Next page. What happened is I looked around and I saw there's not any organizations in this community which can provide for community events. So I thought, and we need business. So I'm going to be on the starting board of the Chamber of Commerce. So I was on it, they knew me because I got around, so I was elected to that board. But I was on the charter initial board of the Chamber of Commerce, and then I was on the Chamber of Commerce for a long time, including 5 times its president. And my goal was to bring community events to Wildomar and have the businesses profit from the fact that the events came to Wildomar. So it was sort of a modest goal, and it was very good that we had that sort of goal because the economy was taking a dive at the time. And something had to preserve something like the Chamber of Commerce. So I was that person who helped ultimately arrange for the events and make the connections that were necessary for some business to stay in Wildomar in spite of the recession, which is what we're going to call it. So at that time, I'm on the Chamber of Commerce, and I said, we don't really have a map of Wildomar. Now, where do I think all these things? I don't know. So I got the drafting board out, this is old school. I got the drafting board out and I drafted a map using the, of course, about 5 years from then I'd used a computer. But at that time, I drafted the map. It's on the wall over there on one of the boards. It's a map of Wildomar in 2001. And it has several unique features. Every road that was dirt is dashed. So you can look on that map and you can find out what roads have been paved in Wildomar since 2001. Also, I visited every location on the map. Cottonwood Canyon? Well, who cares? So Cottonwood Canyon is not the most gentle place to go to, but they welcomed me once they saw what I was there for. And if I couldn't drive on their road because it didn't exist, it's not on the map. So you look on a map that's put out by Map Place, you'll find all these paper roads are on it. I said if I can't drive on it and I can't walk on it, I don't care if it's a paper road. I just won't put it on the map. So some people complained to me that their back house road wasn't on the map. And I said, there's no road there. And that was enough for some people, but others really have wanted me to put their road in anyway. But I wasn't intending to make it a legal document. It isn't a legal document. The proportions are wrong. I made the housing tracts larger than they really were so that I could read the names on the streets. And then they're cross-indexed on the back of the map so you can actually look them up. I also included some housing tracts that were in the process of being built but weren't built yet. I went to the developer, I said, what are these streets going to be named? I put them on the map because I said, you don't want your map to be outdated in a year. Well, it was quite a few years before it became outdated. Also on the map are the elevations in Wildomar and every church and school. I was thinking, people might want to go to church somewhere. Where do they have a map where they can find a church? Well, they can look on this Chamber of Commerce map because they're there, every church and school. Anyway, that was a big task. It took a couple of years to finish. And then the Chamber sold them. 10,000 maps were printed. So some people probably still have these in their closet. But at the time, they were useful. A few things have happened since 2001, in spite of my efforts to put the new housing tracts in. So at that time, another thing I did was form 2 nonprofits. Now, I filed for nonprofit status for the Wildomar Historical Society and for the Wildomar Community Council. So I was operating 2 nonprofits for purposes in Wildomar. One for the purpose of historic preservation and interest. That was the Wildomar Historical Society, which I stayed on until I got elected to the city council because it became a conflict of interest. So was it really a conflict of interest? Well, I wasn't going to find out. That's what they told me. But these were 501c3 nonprofits. And the other one I founded was a community council. Do you remember that Wildomar Interest League? Now, do you remember the MAC? And now you can remember the community council had the same scope, everything in Wildomar. So we had subcommittees dealing with all sorts of things, including trails, but including everything but the Historical Society. So one of the committees was called WIN, Wildomar Incorporation Now. Now, I was not an incorporation person. So if you look on the wall, you'll see that there's "We Support Wildomar Independence" signs and stuff. All I wanted was independence. But this was not to be, because the tide of big government is running strong in California. So 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if you wanted to become a city, there were certain rules and stuff. 20 years ago, there were different rules. The state decided, for whatever reason and whoever was in power, that they were going to obliterate all new cities. Now, they wouldn't tell you that, so we didn't even know it. We didn't know how much under the gun we were, but they made a revenue neutrality thing, which had never existed, and a comprehensive fiscal analysis that had never existed. 85% of all the cities in the state of California had no revenue neutrality and no comprehensive fiscal analysis. So when people get excited about them, I say, oh, we didn't have that, we didn't have that. Cities did not have these things. These were formed by the state after the Orange County bankruptcy. So there's reasons why that happened too. But the basic was they weren't watching the till. So, but anyway, we all got punished because they made rules that made it difficult for cities to exist. And they were being formed in California for 4 cities a year. After the passing of these laws, you could count on the fingers of your hand the cities that were being formed. And in Riverside County, no city had been formed before Wildomar in 16 years. They had blocked cities by making special rules. So who got the benefit? Big cities, because they could annex. So that was a problem that we didn't know was that severe at the time we started our incorporation effort. But looking back on it, you have to ask, how did we do it? Because the laws were against us. And LAFCO had been adjusted to the new laws. And the LAFCO, which is the Local Agency Formation Commission, governs annexations and incorporations. And obviously they were not having to do much work on incorporations because they weren't happening. They were doing so little work on incorporations that when we incorporated in Wildomar, they weren't sure who was going to sign the paperwork. Of course, I was the head of the incorporation committee, so I signed the paperwork, but it took them a while to figure it out because they didn't have anybody left in the staff that had done an incorporation and was still employed. LAFCO had George, he'd been around for a long time. Yeah, okay. So they basically knew the rules. They just hadn't done it. And again, are you seeing how unusual Wildomar must be for this to happen? So the WIN committee was all volunteer, just like the Wildomar Community Council, just like the Wildomar MAC, which you had to apply for, but it was really a volunteer position. And the Wildomar Interest League. But people are in this community that want to do this kind of thing. That's what I love about the community. They're still here. Sometimes I look around and I say, well, we're not going in the right direction with the city because we're having too much development. Well, I do say that. But then I ask myself, what are the people like today? Is the community still got the same base type of feeling to it? And the answer is yes. Even the new people that moved in, when they didn't have all this stuff, it's my opinion, they are the kind of people I might like to know. They're more interested in their community than just being interested in themselves, which is sort of a Me Too thing that happens today. So I still find them here. I don't find as many rural ones because we're not providing for it in the city, so I hope the city wises up. But I'm sort of happy that I can still find the same type of people out here. So I got really interested in history from talking to David Brown, which you may have heard of if you've been in Wildomar for a while. He was a rancher. He had quite a few acres that he tilled, 4,000 or something. And his house was sat on Grand Avenue. Two of his houses sat on Grand Avenue. So you've seen the Brown House and so forth. But his father owned them, he owned them. Okay. But he was a good storyteller. And we had remarkable founders that were named after. They were all educated. They were farmers, but they were educated. There's a difference. They'd all been to college and graduated. Margaret Collier Graham was a writer of note, and some of her books are still available today. They were intelligent, and so they decided they would make a city of Wildomar. It's there, right up there underneath where I am. The picture of the city they envisioned in 1885. So it's that bigger golden thing down there in the corner. They did a 5-year report on that city, just like you would want them to do, showing its success and what troubles it had. So there's actually a 1891 5-year report for Wildomar. Remember, in those days, they didn't know cityhood was such a big thing. Elsinore, I think, had 400 or 600 people when they incorporated as a city. They just wanted to do it. Wildomar wasn't really a city-type place for the most part, so they didn't want to incorporate back then. They could have saved us a lot of trouble. But they had their own ways, and I'm okay with it. We learned a lot about government in this whole thing, some of which we probably don't want to know. But we do want to know it because it's affecting us everywhere. And the big government has sort of overrun the individual and the individual communities. So how did we end up getting incorporated? You've heard the odds, they're against us. Cities aren't incorporating. I went out to find somebody to do the comprehensive fiscal analysis for the WIN committee, and I didn't find anybody that had done one. Because it was so long ago in most places. Finally I found 2 that said they had done them. One was good, one wasn't. So that's something that we had to judge about. What they didn't know is all the new rules, all the new laws that had happened since the last incorporation in 1991 here. So it wasn't just revenue neutrality, that you can't steal from the county by taking their extra profits. It wasn't just that, it was the other new rules. How are the taxes going to be distributed and so forth. We did ultimately find somebody to do that, and did a comprehensive fiscal analysis. So LAFCO was not interested in our application. They're the people that make the judgment call on this kind of thing. They had a set of secret rules that we found out after a while. Oh yes, there's an additional page for Riverside County. And you have to do it this way, you have to do it that way. They weren't really secret, because if I had known where to look for them, I would have found them. But they weren't the state laws, and every individual LAFCO is allowed to make its own rules, they call them, not laws. Own rules as to how they're going to govern their business. Well, incorporation of a city is trouble for an agency that has to deal with it, because it's a really complicated thing. So LAFCO said, I don't know what they were thinking to themselves, but they started granting spheres of influence to neighboring cities. So the neighboring city of Elsinore applied for a sphere of influence, meaning that they applied for their ultimate boundaries to include parts of Wildomar. So we tried to people from Wildomar tried to go down and protest it, but it was not a protest situation. It was an application situation. The only place we could protest was at Lake Elsinore. And they were the ones asking for it. So they were granted 2 spheres of influence, and Marietta was granted 1 sphere of influence. All the time LAFCO's saying to us, these don't matter. Why are you getting so upset? Why are you getting... They're the ultimate boundaries of a city. In a way, they didn't matter because they weren't a final judgment call on anything, but really they mattered because they were used for planning purposes. And LAFCO used them for planning purposes. And up there on the wall, I've got one which shows Lake Elsinore as extending into 2/3 of Wildomar as Lake Elsinore because they pre-planned it. Because they were required to because they had a sphere of influence. That's what they told me when I visited them. So there had to be a logical reason for the extension of a city, but no, there didn't. So one mayor in Lake Elsinore said, you know, we should only have Elsinore go up to Elsinore High. So, and that actually was something they were thinking of. Just take that area. Later we can take the other areas. Another one thought, he was on WR-COG. Remember this group? WR-COG produced a map eliminating Wildomar. And they did that because the person that was ahead of it at that time was the mayor of Lake Elsinore. So, the people out here complained about it. That's the only reason I know about it. So, how are we going to preserve this area? So, the county offered us a couple of things. They said, well, maybe you can be a community of interest. That is a community which has enough history and position to be of interest as an area to incorporate at some point in the future. And we applied for it, and Sandra Etchison and Maria Taylor, Lee Reeves, they gathered the signatures, they ran out and got 30% of the voters. And so we became a community of interest number 7. Then they decided that they weren't going to let these things exist forever. So they were going to substitute unincorporated community instead. So we had to go out and acquire an unincorporated community number 7. And then at the end of the time, which is now quite a few years, at the 5-year analysis on it, there was nothing to replace it. They just left it there. That's because they weren't incorporating any cities. So what was there to do? So that was looking like nothing was going to happen. Now, the state legislature passed a law allocating VLF funds, vehicle license fee funds, that would go to the cities, and they would have gone to new cities, but then they put a sunset clause in the law so that after a certain date, no monies went to new cities. So I say that they were against small cities incorporating. They were maybe against small communities, period. Maybe they were just into the big stuff now. So we hired a consultant in Sacramento. This is just a volunteer committee called the WIN Committee. We hired a consultant in Sacramento to look to see how we could modify one of the bills concerning vehicle license fees to allow us to incorporate. And he changed 8 words in the bill. And with those 8 words, 4 cities were able to incorporate. We were the first one. After that, the legislature got wise that someone actually incorporated, and they wiped out the whole thing. So there was no monies left anywhere. So that's why we're not looking for too many more cities to incorporate. Because until our legislature wises up that communities are more important than big cities, we're going to be in trouble in the state. So anyway, as I was coming along with it, we got that changed. Now we still have revenue neutrality and comprehensive fiscal analysis to do. I found somebody to do the comprehensive fiscal analysis, and they had to figure out how to do it because there have been so few cities incorporated in the state in the last 16 years. But we did find it and we submitted it. Now, it requires a certain percent of the voters to approve this thing for it to actually be accepted. So we got that percent, presented it to LAFCO, and they said, you didn't follow the rules exactly. Maybe you got that percent of people in your community to sign it, but you had to finish the fiscal analysis to our satisfaction first. Look at our rules. So this is one of the 4 times during the incorporation process that we hired a lawyer. We had to hire a lawyer 4 times to prevent bad law from hamstringing us in the incorporation process. So you would think, why doesn't volunteer group trying to do their own community have to end up hiring a lobbyist in Sacramento and 4 lawyers? Why? I think there's something wrong in the state of California. But I don't care because we proceeded on and they ultimately had to accept the petition because the lawyer pointed out some facts to him. Why did we have to do this for it? But anyway, at the conclusion, we couldn't protect ourselves and remain independent because of the hostile actions of neighboring cities and the actions of the county. There was nothing left for us to do but to forge ahead towards the final incorporation. So I was an independence person. I looked at it and I said, independence is what I want. I can't have it. LAFCO is going to let these neighboring cities rip this city apart, and they're going to steal money from it through agencies that they have, which they did. So we're going to have to incorporate. So once I decided we had to incorporate, that is where all my efforts went, to the incorporation. Got to protect my own life, my own way of doing things in my own city as it becomes. So if you look on the wall over there, you'll see the independence signs. Just one little side note concerns the cemetery. So why does the Wildomar City Council have its meeting and then break off and then have a cemetery meeting? This can't be very common. When we do the cemetery meeting, we declare that we're not going to accept any money for actually running the cemetery district. But we're the same people. So what happened is Wildomar had a historic cemetery, and it formed in 1889. And Elsinore had a historic cemetery too. So did a unnamed other cemetery district that went bankrupt. So the county, the LAFCO looked around and said, well, LAFCO was supposed to supervise this district, but they didn't. So the county was supposed to be the guardian. They didn't do that, so it went bankrupt and they didn't have the money to pay for anything. So they took it over and they said, well, we'll take care of our problems. Let's combine 2 or 3 cemetery districts and make one district we can manage. These are all individual districts. The cemeteries have been around since the 1880s. So could they do this? Well, they knew there was intense opposition because people like this cemetery. It's a nice cemetery to be buried in. It looks good. It's kept up well and so forth. So, and has had good administration. So people liked it. They said, well, we'll hire a consultant to tell us that we need to combine these districts. So they hired somebody in Chicago. Do we know why? Of course. They didn't want to be confused with any citizens actually making a hassle for this consultant. So, and the consultant came back and said, yes, they ought to be combined. That's what they're hired for, by the way. They're not hired to make independent judgments like you think. They're hired to show how the districts can be combined. And so I went down, I was the incorporation person at the time, and visited a certain, well, I visited George Spiliotis, who's LAFCO staff head. And I said to him, if you go ahead and take over these districts, I'll circulate a petition and force it to a vote. And he looked at me, and we already circulated how many petitions in Wildomar? He knew that he was going to lose his vote. He'd be wasting his time and money. And so he said, well, you're incorporating soon, we won't do anything now. When we incorporated, one of the things he did was to try and unload the cemetery district on the city. And the cemetery district, we couldn't say it was ours. We had to justify it by it being a cost savings, because they don't understand ours and theirs. So we do run the cemetery district. It is a cost saving to us, actually, as it turns out, but it's so that we can have our own cemetery and run our burials the way we want. I think there's quite a variation in cemeteries, by the way. So this is a public cemetery. It's based on where you live in Wildomar. So there's some problems need to be taken care of. But anyway, we meet as a cemetery district as part of our regular council meetings so that we can handle the cemetery business. And we just had to do that, otherwise we were going to lose our cemetery. I hate to say that's ridiculous, but that is the facts of things. So, to summarize the end of this, we found out we were fighting against big government, and that had come to rule California politics. Preserving communities was not something they were interested in. Maybe something I was interested in, but they were not. The new direction was to grow the largest cities possible by annexation. And the reasons for spheres of influence is to guide the cities into how to annex. I say, how could we even get in this state? But that's the truth of where we are. The formation of the city of Wildomar was almost a miracle. A few months this way or that way, it wouldn't have happened. If we hadn't been able to hire lobbyists, it wouldn't have happened. If, though, that wonderful wind committee hadn't been so persevering and appeared everywhere, it wouldn't have happened. So I think the county must have been sitting back, or LAFCO must have been sitting back and saying, how come Wildomar's everywhere? Because we were visiting the commissioners, we were out at the cities, we were down at the city government. We're meeting with our supervisor, Bob Buster, who was a great support to us during this incorporation process. So he deserves to be recognized. So all these things had to come together, and the new laws had to not exist for us to become incorporated. So we need to enjoy it and do right by it. So that's my parting words.